To the AU Commission Chairperson Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Now, today's meeting with the African Union was a third joint sitting of the African Editors Forum and press officers.
The first meeting was held in Accra in Ghana, and later on the sidelines of the AU summit in Rwanda Kigali, SABC reporter Ntlantla Kgatlhane spoke to one of the coordinators, Chinje, on how media can be involved in seeking partnership with the AU.
The chairperson said quite a few things, but that covered not only the role, the potential role that media in Africa can play in ensuring that we ultimately get to that Africa we want by seriously implementing the Agenda 2063. And she went at it from a very targeted, very media-specific perspective. For example, she said, how does media see itself in the agenda? What is media's agenda for 2063? And that's a fundamental question that should challenge all of us involved in this media space. Should challenge us to seek meaningful answers. If we are serious about an Africa, getting to some vision, some dream of an Africa by 2063, if we're serious about that, media remains one of the most critical instruments for transformation of this continent. So obviously, if media does not see a role for itself, then it probably will never play that role. And if media doesn't play the role it should play, we may never get to that agenda. I'll give you a simple example, which again, Dr. Zuma brought up in her speech. Africa is surrounded by two major oceans and two major seas, the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. And yet, we remain distant from the sea. We are still unable to craft a policy on how this very important resource can be used. The only country that has a major merchant shipping industry is a landlocked country, as she said, Ethiopia. Because Ethiopia has seen the importance of having the capacity to take its goods to the market and the impact that can have on Ethiopia's ability to determine the prices of the goods it produces. So there are three things involved here. You've got to produce, you've got to transport, and you've got to determine prices in the market. Without that, and no African country has that, not even South Africa, not even Nigeria. Without that, we can never have the kinds of economies that we should have by 2063. How do we work together with the African Union? We have to look at each, and again, Dr. Zuma challenged us to do this. We have to look at what each of us brings to the table. The African Union has the responsibility of pulling Africans together to think together. African leadership. That is why they've come up with something called Agenda 2063. The AU has created the environment in which such reflections can take place, in which we can capture and encapsulate the African dream. They've done that. That's their role. Their role is to make sure that none of us forgets this, that we're constantly reminded about it. Their role is to make sure that the leadership of the continent, the policy makers, should design the right policies so that we can have these roads and rail lines that link us. Their role is to make sure that people can design policies that lead us to the economic growth, the kind of economic growth that Africa needs. So the AU exists to constantly get us working together, have our minds reflecting together. Now, so we can talk about what the AU does. What can we say about the role of the media in making that happen? If the dream of every African is to get to that Agenda 2063, to get to that world where Africa is a global power, Africa has the right climate policies, African countries are integrating further and further, we have a single global market of over 1 billion people, we have the power, the electricity that drives that engine of growth, and so on. We exploit our seas the way we should. We produce the amount of food we need so that we live in food security, absolute food security. So all of these things are part of that dream. What should the media be doing? Let me tell you, media should be generating a debate around these issues. Media should be moderating the social conversations that we have in Africa on these issues. Media should be looking at the quality of policies, be in a position to critique them, but at the same time be in a position, again, as Madam Zuma said, to recognize what is good about those policies. So it's all of this. But how do we do that if media is not informed? How do we do that if journalists cannot talk about agriculture the way they should talk about agriculture? How do we do that if they don't understand the seas, maritime economy? How do we do that if we as journalists do not come together to reflect together? I can tell you this based on research I've carried out. Only less than 2% of the newspapers columns in Africa, less than 2% talk about Africa. And I can tell you also that over 80% of what our newspapers, what our radio stations say about Africa outside of their own countries, less than 20% comes from us. Over 80% comes from others. Comes from Reuters, AFP, and Xinhua, the Chinese news agency. So even within the media in Africa, we're not helping that agenda. Look at all South African papers when you leave here and count the number of times they talk about other African countries. And then when you've done that, look at where the information they get is coming from. It's not from other Africans. So this is the challenge. So, we've got a huge challenge. We've got to educate ourselves. We've got to come together and reflect together. We've got to even understand our role as media on this continent. We don't even understand it. So it's a disaster. We want to build an Africa we dream of, but we've not even started the journey. So that's, and I think those are the kinds of challenges we're going to have to look at and find answers to. And now you talked about media freedoms. Let me say this. There is nothing as dangerous as giving freedom to someone who doesn't know what freedom is. It's dangerous. I'm not saying media does not deserve its freedom. Media has to, must, and it's important for leaders, political leaders especially, to understand that there is no way they're going to build this continent without the media. Without a strong media, without media that recognizes the importance to speak and speak responsibly. That is what it is all about. So I am 100% for these media freedoms. I believe in us fighting every day. But the best armament, the best weapon we have to entrench freedom in Africa, that weapon is one of media responsibility and media participation in the design, in the development, in the debates. on policies that we need. So media should be very much a part of it, and that's the best way to guarantee that media remains free, respected, and understood.
What are the qualities of a good policeman?
In the police, we look at the overall wellness of police, not just physical well-being, but also mental well-being. Also looking at economical well-being, and also looking at the physical well-being is not just about exercise and dieting, but it's also about the health and safety aspects of our members.
Nursing is a caring profession.
It's important for us to make our communities aware of those criteria, that there's academic criteria and there's some personal attributes that are all considered before a nurse is allowed to enter into a nursing qualification.
If not resolved, challenges in work environments can lead to depression.
We talk about work-life balance, and it's very important that also, if you are going through or you are in a very stressful work, when you are not